Welcome to the Table Podcast, where we discuss issues of God and culture, brought to you by Dallas Theological Seminary.
Welcome to the Table. We discuss issues of God and culture. I'm Darrell Bock, Executive Director for Cultural Engagement at Dallas Theological Seminary, and my guest today is Sukhwant Bhatia, who actually was a student of mine many moons ago. You were here in the 1980s, I believe?
86 I joined here.
86, yeah. Okay. And Sukhwant is here to help us on the series that we're doing on world religions, and today the topic is Sikhism. And I really think it's a privilege to have you here because you are a former Sikh. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, Sukhwant is founder and president of the North India Institute of Theological Studies, which is located in the province of Punjab in India, which is in northwest India. And then he also, I mean, you're like me, you got more than one title, is the president and CEO of Sikh Partners International, which is headquartered in Fort Worth. And so you travel back and forth between the States and India, is that right?
Yes, since the last 2 years. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, we were just based in India all these years.
Okay. And you founded the school in Punjab, which we'll talk about its importance for Sikhism in just a minute, back in 2003, and it took you 4 years to get accredited. So the school is now in its 10th year, and you...
yes.
And you've got about, 48 to 52 students at any one time?
Yes. Total strength this year is 66.
Uh-huh.
But at a time on campus will be between 48 to 52.
Okay. Very good. So your first decade of existence, correct?
Yes.
Very good. Well, Sukhwant's going to help us walk through Sikhism, and he told me a story before we started recording that I think is great. So you came to Dallas in the 1980s, and you're sitting in the world religions class, right? And
well, the first thing that happened in the class was that somebody asked me, where you're from. So I mentioned I'm from India, from a Sikh background. So they asked me to just briefly share my testimony. I took about 2-3 minutes and I shared like you asked me now. And after I stopped, suddenly the person says, but then what happened to your sickness? I said, no, not from a Sikh background, but it's a Sikh background. Then they say, what is that? And then later on I discovered, I said, they'll probably learn that in the class, is a class on world religion. We finished the whole course, and there was no mention about Sikhism. Mm-hmm. So I said, how come we are not studying about Sikhism? It's actually the third major religion in India. Mm-hmm. Christianity comes after that. Mm. So that was kind of an interesting thing. But I'm so glad to know that since then, Dallas Seminary has included it. And I often come in as a visiting guest lecturer for those.
So you have to seek out the Sikhs in order to understand what's going on in India.
Well, that's kind of we put the name of the organization. It's kind of a little play on word. Uh-huh. It says Sikh Partners, but also trying to focus upon the Sikhs.
That's great. So, and that actually is not surprising to me. I mean, if you were to ask me a week ago what I knew about Sikhism, I would say I knew how to spell the word. I mean, and so I've been, my last week, it's been an acquaintance with Sikhism through reading, and so I'm really pleased to have you in to talk about this. Let's walk through first your personal story. So you are a former Sikh. So you grew up as a Sikh. Does someone come into Sikhism, I mean, in Christianity, you have a convergence experience or something like that. Are you born into Sikhism? How does that work?
Well, let me get back quickly a little bit of the history of Sikhism. Sikhism is about 500 years old.
Okay.
And primarily came at the same time as the Renaissance. Mm-hmm. And it came during the 1400s when the Muslims were invading India. Mm-hmm. At that time, a group of Muslims and group of Hindus who didn't like what was happening, they formed a kind of a militia to fight against the Mughal invasion. That small group grew to be today what we call Sikhism. Okay. But since this group was made up of Muslims and Hindus, they had to live in harmony. Mm-hmm. So they came up with a philosophy, practical life, and all kinds of things where they borrowed from Sikhism, borrowed from Hinduism, borrowed from Islam, rejected both the things, kind of formed a new religion, a new faith to live with. Mm-hmm. So that was the birth of Sikhism. And it didn't get refined till about 350 years ago. And they're still in the process of kind of glorifying the religion to kind of give it a theological tone to basically it was a military group that came together. But it grew very fast. Now there are about 20 million Sikhs and another 30 million followers of Sikhism. So it's a good group, but it's still about a little over 2% of the population of India.
And I have a source here that talks about the fact that there are about 80,000 Sikhs here just in the United States. At least that's the number that this source is telling me. Does that sound low or high?
It's very low. It will be a lot more.
Okay.
Because if you go to California, they are a lot. I've been going back and forth over there. And altogether, what I heard that there are 2 million Sikhs in UK and US. I don't know exact number which place, but I'm sure it's more than 80,000.
That's interesting. Okay, so part of my point here is, and this is interesting, is this is actually originally a very regional religion, even though it has a very important history component to the history of India. Let's go back. You said that Sikh is actually more important in India than Christianity is in terms of its presence. What are the other dominant religions in India?
Hinduism, number one, which is about 83%. After that comes Islam, about 13%.
Okay.
And then comes Sikhism, Christianity, Jainism, Buddhism, all kinds of other things.
Okay. All right. So that kind of gives us some context. And, of course, now the chances of running into someone who comes out of a Sikh background in the United States is not as isolated as some people might think, because there actually are, as you mentioned, a few million between the United States and the UK who are here. Probably the most distinctive feature, I think, of Sikhism that might help someone identify that someone is a Sikh is the turban.
Turban and underneath uncut hair, because in Sikhism we never cut our hair.
Okay.
So that's the primary purpose of the turban.
Okay. So let's go back and talk about the origins of this. You said it came from about the period of the Renaissance. Is it Nanak? Is that the...
Yes.
Okay. Is the founder?
Yes. He was actually part of Sufism. And later
which is a mystical Islam.
It's mystical Islam.
Okay.
And Hindu version of Sufism is what's called a Bhakti movement.
Okay.
So it is a combination of both. So he was basically introducing something that will be accepted by both the Muslims and the Hindus. So the emphasis came upon devotion and good works rather than identifying with one group or the other group. And you asked me earlier, I was born to a Sikh home, so that's why I'm a Sikh.
Okay.
But Sikhism is something that people adopted. They didn't like to call it a conversion. For example, my father was raised as a Sikh by my grandfather when they were in Pakistan. But my grandfather was from Afghanistan. And my great-grandfather was from Iran. But they were Muslims. They rejected Islam. That means they had to move to the east of Iran. They settled in Afghanistan. That's where my grandfather believed in this mystical Sufism, Bhakti movement and all. But it didn't make any sense to him. So he rejected that and he moved south of Afghanistan. Now we call Pakistan, but that time it was Greater India.
Okay.
And he raised his children as Sikh. When they moved in 1947 to India, that's where I was born. And I was born in a Sikh home. But my mom's side of the family, they have been kind of a pure Sikhs for the last 300 years.
Oh.
And but it depends. So my dad's side will be considered as Sikh as my mom because of the faith and belief in Sikhism.
Now, it's interesting. Now, again, just to give some historical context, Greater India was divided, I think in 1948, am I right?
47.
47. And the largely Muslim portion of India became Pakistan, right?
Yes.
And then the mostly Hindi part of India became India, which, if anyone who knows the politics of that part of the world knows that has always been a tension-filled area because of that difference. So the difference between Islam and Hinduism has been a historic part of the region, and this was an attempt to back in the 1400s, 1460s thereabout, an attempt to establish a religious faith that drew on both, but at the same time was pretty clear that we're not Hindus and we're not Muslims, right?
Yep, that's true.
So, so as we're thinking about the core of what Sikhism is, let me ask you that question. Kind of what's at the what makes Sikhism other than the differentiation of we're not Muslim and we're not Hindi, but we have we've breathed that air to a certain extent.
In fact, understanding that part will also explain why Sikhism was kind of excluded from what happened in India and grew but didn't have much impact about Christianity. Until the mid-80s, India only had two classes, rich or poor. And as you're aware that the caste system is so severe in India, when we were growing up, I came from upper caste, came from a very wealthy home. And my understanding given to me at the time about the Christians was that Christianity is a religion of the poor and the untouchable. And the idea was that those who can't afford to be Muslims, Hindus, or Sikhs, they become Christian. So Christian faith had not made any attempt to go to North India, especially to Punjab, and I'll explain that in a little while why.
Okay.
But the first missionaries that came to India, their primary focus was to minister to this group which was absolutely rejected by the Hindus. They were called untouchables. They couldn't go to a temple. They will not associate with them. In fact, it was so bad that we would not allow a low-caste person to touch us. We will be considered unclean. That group was the first group that became believer. And when the missionaries ministered to them, established them, the mission compound came and everything, rest of India said, aha, these people never had any religion of their own. Finally, they found it. It's Christianity. So that was the understanding with which I was raised. So there was no reason for me to even look at Christianity, not even look at that as a faith, had it not the various circumstances that happened in my life that first made me reject Sikhism, reject Islam, reject Hinduism before I opened to even listen to what Christianity was.
Okay, now that's interesting, and we'll come back to that. Let me make one other point before we move on, and that is, I said it was a predominantly regional religion. So this is located, it was founded in Punjab, which is a particular province or state of India, located in what, the northwest corner of India, is that right? Yeah. Right up against Pakistan, am I right about that?
In fact, Punjab was divided into two. So there's a Punjab in Pakistan, there's a Punjab in India.
Oh,
so
interesting.
it's kind of divided right in the middle.
And are the Sikhs just in one portion of Punjab, or are they in both regions of Punjab, both the Pakistani and the Indian side?
If you are able to see the map where Amritsar is, it's right about 10 miles from the border of Pakistan. That's kind of the Jerusalem of the Sikhs. That's where the Golden Temple is. That's where the hub is.
What's the name of the city again?
Amritsar.
Oh, man, I have no idea how to spell that.
And so that's where it grew from, even though Guru Nanak's birthplace and his grave is still in Pakistan. So people travel there to worship. But that's where it grew from and spread all the way up to New Delhi. But primarily remained in Punjab. The reason because Sikhism was also an agriculture community. So that group has been kind of now called the breadbasket of India because it's a very fertile land. And so that's where it kind of concentrated.
And is Lahore in Punjab as well?
No, Lahore is in Pakistan.
In Pakistan.
Yeah.
Okay. So so we've got this regional religion that started in reaction to Hinduism and Islam. So what exactly is it? What makes Sikhism? They
took for example, few things from Islam, few from Hinduism. They said that there's only one God, period. But they didn't want to name that God, and they didn't want to create a shape for that God.
Okay, so that is an Islamic influence, correct? Okay.
But they took the softer form of reincarnation from Hinduism, and they said, yes, there is a rebirth, but we don't cross the breed. The humans stay human, and the animals stay animal. But there's a kind of reincarnation.
Okay.
But this life is given to us to break their cycle, so our destiny as a heaven and hell can be decided right now. But the distinctive of Sikhism is that they went to a great length to describe the holiness of God, His character and everything, and portrayed the sinfulness of man. But the concept they strongly introduced was that you can never ever know this God without the help of a mediator. So the concept of guru was kind of specialized by the Sikhs. And so that's what they basically believe in right now, that you got to have your mediator. The only problem is that 10 human guru they had in the past. They kind of declared them as the mediator.
Right.
But that's not right because they themselves have asked for a mediator. But what hinders Sikhism right now to look anywhere else in terms of anyone claiming to be God, even including Jesus, is that their prime doctrine says that God cannot be incarnate. But they were reacting that to Hinduism. And so that's what makes up. But it's built on works, hard works, lots of good works. And also they formed themselves more or less like the Jews. The concept was that God's relationship is not so much with individuals, but with the community. So we as a community have to stay together. Only then we can have God's blessing. And if anybody breaks the norms of the community, you need to throw them out, kill them, or whatever. But it's primarily built upon good work, borrowed from both sides, but worshiping one God, but no name for that God.
And there's a lot of, can I say, devotion attached to Sikhism. You mentioned the Golden Temple, which is I take it it's the location where the equivalent of Scripture is located for Sikhs, which is a work called, and I'm going to let you pronounce it,
Granth Sahib, that's kind of the holiest book that they believe. It's actually a compilation of, let's say, psalms or a beautiful poetry. You have to sing it. You can't read it.
Okay.
It takes years of practice. That's what my mother was expert in. That she used to teach the young girls.
So she was a reader in the temples.
Yes. Professional reader and also professional teacher. Because even if you look at the page, there's no word division. It's just written all words put together, letters.
Yeah.
You have to learn to sing it to be able to get the meaning of that. And so that book has become the central part, and they declared that book as the mediator. That this book will guide us in life. The concept of tithing, I was first taught in Sikhism. It's called Dasham. Basically what it means that you're supposed to give 10% of everything, including your time. So everybody puts in 10% of the time as a service to the temple. So this Gurdwara is called, that you have to go there locally or somewhere else to put in your service. I remember my mom for years at 4 o'clock in the morning, she used to go to the local Gurdwara, Sikh temple, to sweep the floors for an hour. That was her tithing.
And there, I've seen pictures of people reading the book, and then there's this, I don't know what to call it, behind them where it's fanning them, I guess, was the original purpose of it, to keep them cool because scriptures would be read when it was very hot, or is there something else going on there spiritually?
That book is called a living book.
Okay.
It may sound funny, but every night they carry the book, they put the book to bed, a special bed, and they put water and food next to the book.
Okay,
it's like putting cookies for the Santa Claus.
I remember that. This is different.
But the amazing thing is, long time ago, I wrote a small paper trying to compare Sikhism with Christianity in a positive way. And oftentimes people accused me that I changed my religion. I say, no, I was a true Sikh because I was taught well to go and search for my mediator, and I found it. And Bible says that there is only one God and one mediator between God and man, the man Christ Jesus, who gave his life as a ransom for us. So I traced that how much influence Christianity actually had on Sikhism, except that they will not try to accept it. Because that was the only neutral thing they could find at that time.
Yes.
And probably even Guru Nanak had access to the literature renaissance at the time about the Christian faith.
Interesting. Well, let me go back and gather some stuff. The term Sikh actually means disciple, doesn't it?
Yes.
So, I mean, there's some fascinating points of connection in that regard. And there is this regard for this book that is basically poetry, and it leads in this devotion to God. That's basically when you gather around the book and hear its reading, it's designed to help you meditate on God. Yes. And then let's talk about the gurus a second. Are Sikhs the only religion that has gurus, or do gurus come from other faiths in the region?
They are. The concept of a teacher, guru, has always been there. But what happened about, I'll say, 250 years ago or so, Sikhism divided into two sects, just like what happened with the Catholic and the Protestant church. Half of the Sikhs believe that there is an apostolic succession, so that guruship has continued, and somebody always have to be on the throne. But the other half, which is the majority, they said, no, the book is the final guru. No human being can be a guru. So that kind of divide is going on, that practice going on. The group that believe that there is a human being who can be at the top of the religion, that group has divided now to 5 or 6 different groups. So different things have come up, just like the comparison you can make with the Christian faith. And but the large portions do not believe in any human guru.
So when someone goes to sit at the feet of a guru, they're connected to someone of Sikh background, but it's this one group that has this line of gurus.
Yes.
And there are like 4 or 5 different subsects that exist that someone might connect to.
Yep.
Okay, well, that's all pretty fascinating. Briefly, we got about 2 minutes left before the break. Talk about how you came to faith.
My coming to the Lord was primarily by reading the Bible. And the reason I got started in reading the Bible, because at the age of about 15, I discovered that even though my dad practiced Sikhism, but he actually was a practical atheist. He was in the army. He fought all the wars on behalf of India. And my mom used to say that somewhere in that bloodshed, he lost his faith. And so when I discovered that, it kind of bothered me. And I wanted to know that when I grew up, will I be like my father, who's successful in every way, except he does not believe in God? Or will I be like my mom, who just, for her faith is everything? That made me start looking into Sikhism. After studying it, I wasn't satisfied. My mom encouraged, why don't you look into Islam and Hinduism, since we came from there. I had studied Sanskrit for 8 years. I knew Pashto and Urdu, so I was able to read Quran, other religious literature. And after about 3 years of exhaustive study from age 15 to 18, I rejected everything. Because what people were practicing and what was written in the religious books were 2 different things. So I lived a year in vacuum, believing that maybe my dad is right, that there is no God. Or maybe he existed at one time, gave a good spin to us, and now we are on your own. In that frustration, I was in the college when I met a new student who found out that he was a Hindu, but he claimed to be Christian. So when I asked him to share with me his faith, he shared his Bible with me. And he said, let me explain what's there. The problem was that his Bible was in English, and he only spoke English and Bengali. So he was an English teacher, started teaching me English. I started reading the Bible. A year later, after having read the New Testament 9 times in 8 months and the Gospel of John 22 times, I decided to put my trust in the Lord Jesus Christ.
Oh, wow. So a very direct experience with Scripture is what drew you to the Lord. Yeah, wow. Well, I don't know whether you're the only, but you're the first person of Sikh background to engage in seminary study in the United States, or is this world? Do you even know if this is worldwide, or what's the deal?
That time I was told that I was the first Sikh convert to go for a Master of Theology degree anywhere in the world. And nobody had challenged that. So I don't know whether it's still true or not, but that's what it was. Okay.
And then, of course, you've established this ministry to teach Christianity in the part of the world that you've come from. Let's talk a little bit about Sikhs and kind of what orients them to God. How would you describe what the draw of Sikhism is? I mean, obviously, there's at least I'm looking at this from the outside. One of the things is that it seems to be a very regionally focused religion. That it is almost a form of regional pride. You know, I'm a Texan, and so Texans have certain qualities about them. So that it seems to have that dimension to it. But there's got to be something beyond that.
That's true, because I still use my wild card that I'm a Sikh. Because people are very proud to be associated with Sikhs, and the religion has kind of given them a pride. There's a very strong sense of community. One statement that's often made is that you'll never ever see a Sikh beggar in India, because the community will not allow it. They say, what do you need? What do you need to get back on your feet? So that was one thing, the sense of community. The second, their sense of charity. Every Sikh Gurdwara, Sikh temple is open 24 hours. They serve free food anytime you go. Any new town you can go into, if you don't have a place to stay, you can always go to Gurdwara. You'll get a place to stay. You'll get food. and if necessary, you'll also get a transportation if you need to. So it was kind of a community sense of a religion. Even when they have grown to such a large thing, they have been able to maintain that. And so that is very attractive to people. And once you receive the gifts, you want to give it one day. So that's one aspect. Second, the Sikhism gave them something which was non-divisive. So they didn't have to find things like, are you a Hindu or are you a Sikh? It gave them a lot of room. Okay, there's one God, and we only believe in him, but we don't have to have a name. So the emphasis became upon your faith. So how much faith do you have in your faith was the kind of the emphasis. And purely on good works. So they kind of masterminded on that these good works are not just putting a penny here and putting a penny over there, but generally producing. So become a productive citizen, you become a proud neighbor.
So it's a highly ethical faith.
Yes, it is. Yeah. It is. I mean, in Punjab especially, another phrase that goes over there is that if you have to have one friend, make sure it's a Sikh. But the opposite side is also kind of a truth that Sikhs were a militant group. So at one point, just 2% of the India's population made 30% of India's armed forces were made of Sikhs. So they are still very aggressive, militant. They will not put up with any nonsense. In fact, oftentimes when there's been a trouble in Punjab for the Christians, it's the Sikhs who come to our rescue. They say, we are also a minority group. You can't do that. And if they stand, I mean, they're willing to fight and willing to die for their faith. So all those things have made people very attracted towards Sikhism. It's a hardworking group, care for one another, and people. So what happens is part of our presentation of the gospel is historically, if I may move to the little bit further, when the modern missions were born with William Carey, that time he was commissioned to do three things. He said missions means do charity, healing, and liberation. And desperately we needed that in India. And but the sad part is that excluded communities like the Sikhs because they didn't need any charity. They didn't need any free healing camps or something like that. And also they didn't need any liberation.
Because they took good care of themselves.
They've already had that.
Yeah.
So it was not a community in crisis. And oftentimes we present our Jesus as the quicker fixer, that if you have a problem, he'll fix it. So it was William Carey who said that we need to start the gospel from the top down, not from the bottom. I mean, that time nobody listened to him. But what has happened is, as a result, there became a disconnect. They did not find any attraction in Christianity because this Christ was presented only for the poor and the one who needed help, rather than for some who had been fine, who have been devoted, who have been searching for this unknown God, and somebody didn't make the connection there.
Interesting. I'm going to come back to that. Let me ask you one more question about Sikhs. You've talked about the fact that God is unnamed, but what kind of conception is there of God? Because if you're coming out of a background that's a kind of a fusion, or at least is wrestling with the relationship between Muslims and Islam and Hindus, the conception of the transcendence very different out of those two backgrounds. So how does that work? How is God conceived of in among Sikhs?
They've used terms like Sadguru, Satnam, which basically means true mediator, true guru, the truth. And they gave the Shabad, which means the word. They literally believe what we believe in the Bible, that the written word actually became incarnate, but does not incarnate into a flesh, but incarnates us as human being in our heart directly. So those concepts that they borrowed from Christianity, so today their word of God, the Granth Sahib, is a living word. So they have started worshipping that book. So if you look for any kind of a symbolism that they portrays what their faith is, then the book has become that symbol.
Yeah, and even the design of the pictures that I've seen of the design of the way the altars work it's a lifted up, at least in some of the pictures I've seen, it's a very lifted up location where the book is elevated over the people who are sitting down underneath. So even the architecture is designed to reinforce the point.
Yes, and everyone goes inside, they bow down before the book and they worship and everything and all that.
Interesting. Okay, so it gives us a feel. There's one other element. We've talked about it being psalms. You've talked about it being chanted. So worship is a very important part.
Yes.
Worship/reflection, I guess it would be the way to describe a lot of what's going on in the activity of a Sikh worshiper. Is that fair?
Yes.
And then that's supposed to translate in the way they live out their life.
Yeah, very much.
Okay. So let's talk. You've talked a little bit. This is actually fascinating because I did do a significant amount of reading, and you're injecting something into the conversation I didn't see very much of in the reading, and that is there are all these hidden connections to Christianity in what you see in Sikhism. Why don't you develop some of that for us? Because I suspect that begins to also deal with the question of, I meet a Sikh, I'm interacting with them, the discussion turns to spiritual things. What are kind of the ways in? How can the aspirations of someone oriented to Sikhism, how does the gospel walk into that space?
Good. I remember when I first started talking about my faith with my mom, her first biggest issue was, I'm not a sinner. What have I done wrong? And so that was one big hindrance to kind of sharing with her, because they had taught so much about doing good works and everything and all that.
And self-sustaining.
Yes. Yep. And the second aspect of that was that which became attractive to my mom, that we were not talking about only this world. See, Sikhs talk about a lot about the world to come. In fact, everything that they're doing it for the Satyug, they're doing it for the Swarg, they're doing it for heaven. But what has happened in our trying to connect with the Sikhs with the gospel, first we are trying to rectify some of the issues that had happened in the past. For example, Christ was always submitted as in crisis management. Something wrong, then we can fix it. Well, they were not looking. Most of the Sikh families I knew are very decent, something that we Christians would love to have a family structure like that. So it's not that we are waiting for them to have crisis so we can introduce Christ to them, but rather we are saying to them that you are so religious, you have worked so hard in your life to seek this unknown God. Let me introduce to you who that unknown is.
Interesting. So it's like an Acts 17 way.
Yeah. And plus, for them to be able to get a picture or glimpse of this God, I take them to John chapter 1. What a beautiful picture that the Word became incarnate and dwelt among us, and we beheld His glory. Nobody has seen God at any time except Jesus. When they read that passage, they say, we never read anything like that. Because most Sikhs have never read the Bible. They only heard about the Bible. But some of the cultural misconnect that happened, and that's where the cultural engagement part, I think, that we missed in the past, because our earlier forefather missionaries were not really missiologists or anthropologists and all. So what happened, when Christianity was introduced to India, it became so opposite to the culture. See, for example, in every other religion in India, when you go to the temple, you sit on the floor, you fall on your face to worship God. It's only in the church that you sit on the chairs with your legs crossed and your hand folded like this to worship the Lord.
So where is the respect for the deity?
Yes. So that was absolutely unacceptable to people. And then there are some other cultural things that happen. For example, in a wedding, in a Sikh wedding, to incorporate both the culture, the bride dresses up like a Hindu bride and the groom dresses up like a Muslim bridegroom. So that's how the wedding takes place.
Oh, wow.
Suddenly, Christianity came and they said, oh, you have to get married in white sari. Now, wearing white is a sign of a widow in India. So people reacted to that why on a wedding day a wife will wear white? And they said, no, that's how symbolizes a Christian wedding. You can't wear. In fact, my mom had so much a problem, and I was getting married and my wife was going to wear white. When I tried to explain to her, they said if these missionaries didn't like red, they could have picked up any other color, blue, black, or mixture color and all that. But why white, which is culturally so offensive? Then in Sikhism and also in other religion, the essence of worship is the instruments that you play. And beautiful music. Well, when Christian faith was introduced, we were told the drums are the devil, and the wind instruments that evoke the spirit, the only instrument you can have is a piano or organ.
Oh, wow.
and they were imported from outside. That just killed the worship in the local church. So now when we're going back and trying to put those things in perspective, he says, no. It's a cultural expression. Jesus did not come to destroy a culture. But the earlier missionaries could not distinguish what is cultural, what is religious.
Right.
Another major problem that became was India was primarily a vegetarian country. Missionaries came and they started eating meat, and you have to eat meat. So there was no room to present Jesus as a vegetarian Jesus. And people, when they read John chapter 6, where it says, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you cannot be my disciple. And old bad Hindi translation says, unless you eat flesh with me and drink blood with me, you cannot be my disciple. So immediately people said, this religion is not for us because you have to eat meat.
It's interesting because in the ancient world, the portrayal of Christians as cannibals was one of the ways to try and put Christianity off. And so it's the same kind of feel that existed in India as well.
When we were serving in India as a pastor and a church, my wife and I made a decision that we will never cook meat in our home. Because if we were to invite a Sikh family or a vegetarian Hindu family, we should be able to tell them the meat has never been cooked in our pots. So we always ate out. We will not cook food and meat in our home pots. That was the only reason they'll come. And they'll even eat in our home. My mom, before she became a believer, till today she's a vegetarian. But before she became a believer, she stopped even drinking water in my house because we were meat eaters. So we had to stop that to make a cultural context with them and have the interaction with them.
Okay, now that's interesting. So there are certain things that so what you're saying is there's certain things that Christians were doing by instinct that were so countercultural that it put Indians off because those life symbols, if I can say it that way, were, and I will use a British word here, were off-putting. Were really things that people would go, ooh, that you shouldn't do. Is there any other thing that belongs in that kind of a category besides meat and the color of a wedding gown?
For example, Sikhs suffered a lot when the Muslim invaders came. And then they suffered a lot when the British came. So in their mind, what they think is first the Mughals ruled us and then the Christians ruled us because they could not distinguish between the British as a country and Christians. So that bitterness is there still today. What we have missed out is we have not allowed Sikhs to see the Jesus of the Bible. Christianity and the Christian faith has kind of blurred that view. So what we try to tell them is read the Gospel of John, read the Bible, see the Jesus of the Bible, not the Jesus of Christianity. So in our connection, the similarities are so much for them to fill the gap that what they've been worshiping unknowingly is actually Jesus Christ. But to bring them to a point to be able to see it, that's the biggest step that we have to take.
Interesting. Now let's transition because you've raised this. There are all kinds of bridges that are already set. There's a respect for God that's already there. There is an appreciation for the moral and ethical work in life and for an integrity that's already there. What other bridges are there between Sikhism and Christianity that if you met a Sikh, you would have some basis of common ground to have a conversation?
See, the Sikhs have not seen that a respectable, educated person can also be a Christian. Even today, any mission efforts that we make in India, they're still in the concept of charity, medical healing, and liberation. And we have 600 million as middle-class family. And top 20%, most of them are Sikhs. We still are not taking the gospel to them. We are still not thinking about them. We're still thinking about the tribals. We're thinking about the untouchable, thinking about the Dalit, which are only like 15% of India's population.
Right.
So as a result, we have completely neglected a group and missed the connection with them. So that's one thing that we're trying to do is to expose them to churches in the city, a respectable group. I have connection with people just because I have an earned PhD and just because I was educated in the U.S.
Right.
Some of those doors, they'll shut them out if I was not an educated person and if I didn't have a respectable degree. So I need a lineup of people in Punjab that I can show that here's a doctor, here's an engineer, here's a businessman, and here's a professor. And look, they're fine believers. They're believers in the Lord Jesus Christ. I don't have that kind of a lineup to show. So culture that respects education, culture that respects that you're hardworking, you achieve something, because they reject the concept of poverty. So sometimes we have Christian organizations that are working among the poor for the last 40 years and they're still poor. Sikhs will say that's unacceptable. That's unacceptable. What systems have you put in place that the person's lifted out and is on his feet? But sometimes he feels as if he want to keep certain people poor for the sake so that we can stay in business as Christians, as a charitable organization. So that is one issue. Sikhs do not like to come to the Lord and sit with a folded hand and tell them, oh, services on Sunday morning, come for an hour. They say, no, when I became a believer, I said, what can I do? I want to be part of the church. I was shocked to find out the church is only going to be open on Sunday morning for 2 hours. Rest of the week is going to be locked up.
In contrast to being 24/7.
Yeah. So some of those things, we need to go back to the drawing board. We need to open it up. Open the church, let people come and sit for meditation, let them come and sit for study. And Christianity cannot be only for Sunday morning. What do we have for people on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday? And let's make the connection at that time.
Now, you said there were certain things that are going on in the Bible that Sikhs are can connect to. Well, what are some of those things? What do you think? And then we'll get to a category that says, and you've already raised one of them, the whole idea of sin is something that just throws people off. But let's start first with, what are the bridges? What are the connection points?
Not only in Sikhism, actually, this is everywhere around the world. There are two books that are missing in the religious books, is the book of Genesis and the book of Revelation.
Okay.
That's what they struggle with. How did life begin and how the whole story is going to end? We have a great listening ear the moment I talk about Genesis. In fact, I wrote one paper when I was at DTS, how to use the Old Testament to share our faith with the Sikhs. They're very fascinated with what happened because they were suddenly told in between story to figure everything out, and they're still asking question now, how did life begin? And why it began? But they don't have the answer how it's going to end. They have a very strong sense of the coming heaven.
Yeah.
So when we discuss about just the Gospel of John, talking about Jesus is coming back again, because your gods and gurus are all dead and buried, you worship on their tombs. They're very fascinated to know more about that. So that's where we make the connection that let's talk about how God created and let's talk about what's going to happen at the end. And so those are some of the major connections in theology, what Sikhism believes and what the Bible presents. There's a big connections about this life, about the blessings in this life, about having the divine enablement so you can be a blessing to somebody else. Some of these are basic concepts in Sikhism.
So there are lots of bridges.
Lots of bridges.
Now, let's talk about the harder concepts, and those are the things that a Sikh isn't prepared or doesn't have categories for. You've mentioned the issue of sin, that was the big starting point for your mom.
Yeah.
And is that just because of? When there's mess in the world, how does a Sikh see that?
Well, for me and for my mom, the concept that of sin was always presented that your good works can outweigh your bad works. So they knew that they have done bad things, but they always thought that we have done enough good to cover up the bad. Now that, I wrote a small track on the whole concept. It's called Can My Good Work Save Me? And in that one, I write three things. One is, first of all, somebody outside of us has to define good. You and I can't come up with a definition of good. So my point in that is, if it wasn't for the Bible, if it wasn't for the Mosaic law, the world would not have known what sinning is, what killing is, what adultery is, because 80% of the judicial system around the world was built on Mosaic law. So that's where the definition came. So when I asked the Sikh, who taught you this is right, this is wrong, you had to go back to the Old Testament, you had to go to the Bible. So that's one thing. The second concept of sin was what James gave, that if you kept the entire law and broke even just one, you're guilty. To seek in that concept, finally the Sikhs understand that. Another concept was that I can't do bad works towards God and then do good to humanity to have that written off. If I have sinned against God, only God can forgive. So how is he going to forgive? So some of those are basic issues of sin, salvation, and sanctification. They are there. The problem is that when we try to present to them, they think they're my views, they're my ideas. So I always open my Bible, I always have it there. I said, Jesus said this. Jesus said this.
So another bridge, I actually think this is important. Another bridge is, given the respect that Sikhs have for a holy book,
Yes.
okay, there's a way to talk about how the Bible teaches what's at the core of Christianity, and a Sikh will intuitively understand how that connection works.
Yes.
Interesting. Sukhwant, this has been an incredibly fascinating, quick journey through Sikhism and a discussion. And the thing that I find fascinating about it are the multiple points of contact that actually exist that lay a lot of groundwork for the possibilities of a Christian and a Sikh having a meaningful spiritual conversation, even though they come from very different backgrounds. Is that your impression as well?
Yes.
Yeah. So, again, thank you for taking the time to tell us your story and to walk us through this. I hear from what you said, your mother did become a believer.
Yes, she did.
Yeah.
And I also want to thank you for bringing it up and talking about Sikhism because it's very important in India. It's very important from many aspects. I have 115 cousins, and most of them are not believers. My extended family is so rich that if they were to come to the Lord, they can finance our budget 10 times within India. So it bothers me that why they are part of Sikhism where they generously give so much money, and how come the church didn't make an effort to reach them for the Lord first, and why didn't make them part of the church?
Interesting.
So a country like India is not poor anymore, but the church in India is still poor because it's primarily made up of poor.
Interesting. Well, again, thank you very much for taking the time to introduce us to this, what I would think would be a pretty fascinating religion and a pretty fascinating journey through Sikhism. And, our hope in this series is to acquaint you with the wide variety of people that you might meet with, a wide variety of religious backgrounds. And we hope you'll join us again real soon on the table to hear about another religion.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Table Podcast. For more podcasts like this one, visit dts.edu/the table. Dallas Theological Seminary. Teach truth, love well.